Okay, so now, okay, I believe it's now recording. All right, so good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's New World Screwworm Update and Identification webinar. So our two presenters today, our main speaker is going to be Marshall Wilson. He is the co-director of the Southwest Border Food Protection and Emergency Preparedness Center. And we also have Tom Patterson and I believe as well as Marjorie Lantana. But Tom Patterson here is the president of the New Mexico Categories Association. So thank you again, Tom, for coming on here and sharing some information that you have with us, and as well as Marjorie Lantana, who's also part of the committee for the New Mexico Categories Association.
Um, I'm Tom Patterson. I have the privilege of serving. I'm a Catron County cattle rancher. I have the privilege of serving as president of the New Mexico Cattle Growers Association. I'm really pleased that tonight you have four members of our executive committee. Uh, with us are Dan Estrada from Trementina. Dan is the president-elect of New Mexico Cattle Growers. And of course, you have Marshall and we have Marjorie Lantana. We appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all today. You know, for the past year and a half, livestock producers across New Mexico have watched New World Screwworm move steadily north through Central America and Mexico. I can tell you that during that time, we haven't been idle. Federal and state health officials, veterinarians, extension personnel, tribal agricultural leaders, and producer organizations have been preparing for the possibility that it would eventually reach the United States. It has. The first reported case was on June 4th in South Texas. 3 days later, a case was reported in Eunice, New Mexico, 385 miles by car west. Those preparations that were getting done over the course of the 18 months are now being put to the test. We've seen strong coordination among USDA, the New Mexico Department of Agriculture, the New Mexico Livestock Board, veterinarians, extension personnel, tribal governments, and livestock producers. Surveillance and response efforts were activated quickly, and I mean quickly, within less than 12 hours, and animal health officials have been highly responsive to concerns from producers and the public. We all need to remember that New World Screwworm is not a food safety issue, but it is a serious animal health issue. It can affect cattle, sheep, goats, horses, wildlife, pets, and other warm-blooded animals. Early detection and rapid reporting are critical to limiting its spread and to protecting animal health. One of the messages we heard last week at our recent New Mexico Cattle Growers mid-year meeting was that more information about New World Screwworm needed to reach tribal producers, tribal ag leaders, and native communities. We agreed. Education and preparedness only work if everyone has access to timely, reliable information. That's why I am particularly grateful to Marjorie Lantana for helping organize today's program. Marjorie serves as New Mexico Cattle Growers Northwest Regional Vice President and chairs our cross-cultural committee. She's been a strong advocate for building relationships among tribal governments, tribal producers, ranching families, and the broader livestock industry. She understands that animal health challenges don't recognize jurisdictional boundaries and that protecting livestock requires all of us to work together. She's invited one of the state's most knowledgeable animal health experts to brief us today. Marshall Wilson, as indicated, serves as co-director of the Southwest Border Food Security and Emergency Preparedness Center. He has spent years already working with producers, veterinarians, emergency managers, tribal governments, and animal health officials on disease preparedness and response. As New World Screwworm has moved northward, he has been one of our primary resources for accurate, science-based information. Marshall also serves as Vice President at Large for New Mexico Cattle Growers and chairs our Animal Health Committee. Before I turn this over to Marshall, I want to emphasize one really important point. The United States successfully eradicated New World screwworm once before. We did it. We did it through science, cooperation, and persistence. We believe, no, we know that the same science-based approach, a science-driven approach to dealing with it, can succeed again. We want to thank you for your interest in this issue and for the work you do every day to support agriculture, animal health, and rural communities across New Mexico. New Mexico Cattle Growers is committed to serving livestock producers across the entire state, and we appreciate the opportunity to learn from and work alongside tribal leaders, tribal producers, and Native communities as we address challenges like New World screwworm together. So thank you all very much. And Marshall?
Thank you very much, Tom. I really appreciate with that opening, and I think it really sets the stage well moving forward. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my slides here. But as we're moving forward, I think that these types of presentations really work much better if we treat them as a conversation rather than just a pure presentation to make sure that the information flow is going both ways. I think as a result of some of what Thomas mentioned at the early outset with what happened in early June and the detection of the canine coming through. We learned a lot from the folks on the ground, and we continue to do so. And so I just ask that, as we're moving through, I just really appreciate the conversation and the questions that will come, and hope that at the end of the day, we get a better product moving forward on the relationship between responders and producers regarding New World Screwworm. So, Mikhail, I really appreciate you hosting and putting this on as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully we will be viewing the right area. I'm not sure what's popping up right now.
Your entire screen is showing
Okay.
now.
Okay. Good. Always a challenge with these split screens to know which one's on. So you should be seeing the presentation view with New World Screwworm update.
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. So starting off, I think what New World Screwworm is has been fairly well covered in the media recently with all the scary headlines, man-eater worm present in the United States, etc. And so I won't go too far deep into what New World Screwworm actually is, but I'll just touch on a couple of the basics. Of course, screwworm itself is actually the larvae of a parasitic fly. The scientific name is Cochlymia homnivorax, that burrows into the flesh of warm-blooded animals. And I think it's important to note that we talk a lot about livestock in our circles regarding New World screwworm because that's where we see a majority of the cases. But of course, it does target any warm-blooded animals up to and including domestic pets, wild canines, wildlife, avian species have been found with it before, and of course humans too. And so with that in mind, it really is a One Health response in terms of what the New World screwworm will target, even though we do primarily see it in livestock. New World screwworm is typically found in South America and the Caribbean until now. And as Tom mentioned earlier, we have seen it before. But a little bit about the New World screwworm life cycle. So screwworm infestations begin when a female lays her eggs on a wound or orifice of a live warm-blooded animal. And so she is really aggressive towards any kind of wound, and she can lay eggs into something as small as a tick bite. And typically she'll lay anywhere from up to 3,000 eggs in her lifespan at about 300 eggs at a time. It's also important to note here that she won't just go after those wounds, but any orifice is a vector for infestation as well. So when we're thinking orifices, we're thinking things like mucous membranes, nasal cavities, eyes, etc. but we also have seen them in animals that did not have any otherwise apparent wounds, but in genitalia of livestock as well, whether it's the pubic sheath or otherwise. So once that female lays her eggs, the eggs will hatch within about 24 hours, and they'll spend about 7 days feeding on that live tissue, burrowing into the flesh, if you can imagine, is for its name's sake of the screwworm. Following that, they'll drop into the ground, burrow into the soil, and pupate, and they can emerge up to 2 months later. Some studies have shown that they can overwinter and emerge much later than that. So, some specific concerns for us, especially as we're coming into the summer. We've got a good monsoon season lined up, and our temperatures are fluctuating between the what a New World Screwworm would prefer and hotter than a New World Screwworm would prefer. But of course, when we're thinking about the El Nino system, what we're really looking forward to as we come into the colder months are those desperately cold temperatures, along with the additional snow moisture coming along with that. And so, as we're moving forward, just something to keep in mind about the life cycle of the fly and its preferred temperatures. We sure could use a brutally cold winter coming out of the El Nino. Tom mentioned it before, but New World Screwworm is something that we've seen here in the United States before. Our producers have dealt with it. They know firsthand the challenges that come along with managing cattle and with New World Screwworm present within the environment. And historically, New World screwworm eradication efforts began in the early 60s and 70s, primarily with the invention of a tool known as sterilized insect technique, which is really the primary tool used to eradicate it from the United States and push it down through Mexico and on towards the geographic barrier of the Darien Gap, which is, I don't know if you can see my mouse cursor moving, but down here at the very southern tip of the image here, where they were held in check by a single facility that produced sterilized screwworms known as the Copeg facility. And that facility is USDA owned and in joint operation with Panama down there. But currently, that is one of the only operational sterilized insect technique um, production sites in the world for New World Screwworm. Now, we do have some others that are being planned and coming online, but as we're looking at kind of the eradication efforts and pushing things down, we had much more capacity back in the 60s and 70s than we do currently. And just to give you a little bit of an idea of what the production of the sterilized insect technique would be required to get back to those eradication numbers. The Copeg facility currently produces around 100 million sterilized flies per week. And of whenever we eradicated New World Screwworm in the 60s and 70s, with several different production facilities, we were producing somewhere between 500 million to 600 million sterile flies per week. So you can kind of imagine as the New World Screwworm broke its barrier and started to migrate north, as we saw it back in early 2023 and moving forward to 2024 and now into 2026. With that one single production facility, we were essentially trying to spread a single spoonful of peanut butter, if you'll take a metaphor, over larger and larger pieces of bread. And that peanut butter just wasn't going as far as it used to go. So as we started to notice reported increases in cases in Panama, and then it jumped the gap, moved into Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico in 2024. And that 2024 date is really key because, as many of you remember, that's when we officially shut our southern border crossing to live animal imports from Mexico. They reopened briefly in 2025, but then because of the continued northward expansion of the screwworm into Mexico, the decision was made by USDA to again reclose those live animal imports. So just a little bit of a situation update from what is currently being reported in Mexico. As I mentioned before, the first case was diagnosed in November 2024. And just as of a couple of weeks ago, there were over 27,000 cases reported in Mexico. And as of June 5th, over 2,000 active cases. Now, I should caveat that the active case counts have continued to increase. Again, part of that due to the changes in the weather becoming a little bit more amenable to fly behavior. And then, as we saw, some small movements based on animal movements that allowed the fly to kind of move around and become established breeding populations in places it otherwise was not seen. Now, of course, as mentioned earlier, majority of the cases are in cattle, with a smaller number of reported cases being reported in horses, pigs, dogs, sheep, and goats. And what's interesting is that if you look at the USDA's numbers, so the numbers that they're getting from Mexico itself, we're not really seeing a lot of confirmed cases in wildlife. And I think that's largely due to the fact that we lay our eyes on our livestock a lot more often than we do wildlife in certain cases. And so it's not that it's not in the wildlife, it's just that it's not being detected and reported in the wildlife. And most of those infestations are found in the navel of newborn calves before that navel has time to go ahead and heal up, or as secondary cases to trauma. Thinking branding, typical husbandry techniques of ear tagging, dehorning, castrating, etc. And that's where they're seeing the secondary trauma infestations come into those animals. And I should also note that just because we see an infestation of any kind of maggot in an animal doesn't mean that it's New World screwworm. There is what we commonly refer to as the ordinary blowfly maggot, excuse me, which is called the secondary screwworm. And I want to make sure we don't get those two cases confused. But it is possible for secondary screwworm cases and New World screwworm cases to be present in the same wound. And so it's incredibly important to report those infestations and send samples of those larvae into the appropriate labs so they can determine, if they actually are those blowfly larvae, the secondary screwworm, or the much more invasive, much more aggressive, much more debilitating New World screwworm. And so this kind of walks us up to just about a couple of weeks ago and walks us up into where we are currently. The first official case that has been deemed as a domestic case in the United States was officially confirmed by the USDA on June 3rd. And it's important to note that affected animal is a 3-week-old calf with larvae identified in its umbilical area. In this particular case, caught me a little bit off guard because I would not have anticipated a 3-week-old calf to still have an opening in its umbilical area after birthing. But it just goes to show that how truly aggressive and invasive these New World screwworm flies are. And that when it comes to time for the female to lay her egg, it doesn't matter what she's looking for. She's going to find a place to lay it on a live animal in living tissue to allow her babies a chance to hatch out and continue their life cycle. And of course, this is the first U.S. case in about 60 years domestically. It should also be noted that we did have New World screwworm in Florida in 2016 and 2017 in the Keys with a large infestation in the key deer. But that was deemed an isolated case and was cleaned up rather quickly due to a variety of factors. And then, of course, that this is a high consequence event to the U.S. cattle industry, and estimations are that the yearly economic impact to the industry is in the realm of $113 billion. And that's not all losses, but that does include the effects of managing New World screwworm, ranging from increased uh, uh, riders, increased employees to go out and ride livestock, to the additional therapeutics and wormers and such that producers are having to buy and treat their animals. And so I think the bottom line there is early detection and producer vigilance are critical to the response for not only New Mexico, but others in Texas, Arizona, etc. And making sure that when we identify a New World screwworm, we're allowing the response groups all the information that is required to go in and take the appropriate action. So that was June 3rd. And then to go forward, on June 5th was when the second New World screwworm case was reported. And it was fairly close to the index case, the first case that was found on June 3rd. And again, it's in another 1-month-old calf. And do believe that the umbilical area was again the target of the New World screwworm there. So at this point, New Mexico was on super high alert in terms of our preparedness efforts, making sure that all of our agency contacts were updated on what was going on within within Texas and really monitoring what the Texas Animal Health Commission, what efforts they were putting forth within these areas to manage the spread of the New World screwworm. At this time, it was still about 200 to 300 miles away from the New Mexico border. And so we anticipated that New World screwworm would be within New Mexico within about 4 weeks, based on some of the modeling done by USDA and others from this point moving forward. But little did we know that just a couple of days later, it was going to be in our own backyard. And so, and this was the third and fourth case were announced at the same time by USDA, but the third case was the one that really pinned in on New Mexico. And this case was a canine, a dog from a resident of Eunice, New Mexico, who took her dog to a veterinarian in Andrews, Texas. So the vet in Texas received the dog, sent in the larvae to the lab for confirmation. It was overnighted, received the next morning, and that's when we've got our official determination from USDA. So immediately once we got the confirmation from USDA, our immediate response actions were thrown into motion. We started off with that evening. It was a Sunday evening. We pulled together a group of folks, asked the local extension agent from Lee County to actually go and visit the owners of the dog and find out a little bit more about some of the cases, some of the aspects surrounding the case. At this point, we were looking for, any kind of movement of either the individuals or the dog itself to Mexico or Texas, where the other cases had been reported, primarily just with a view of trying to figure out where this New World screwworm case had originated and help us backtrack and see where we needed to prioritize some of our other response actions. And so he went and visited with the owners that evening, and then the next morning, immediately, we had a crew of about 8 people on the ground going door to door within the immediate area, trying to talk to animal owners, passing out information on New World screwworm, etc. And that ground surveillance crew grew to about a team of 20 personnel representing individuals from Lee County itself, the New Mexico State University Extension Service, New Mexico State Livestock Board, New Mexico State Department of Agriculture, and others going door to door, talking with individuals, giving information on New World screwworm, how to treat it, how to report it if it was identified, and really trying to figure out if there were any additional cases that were within the community of Eunice, and so we could act on them quickly and put in the appropriate containment measures for that. And so those initial knock and talk, we call it the knock and talk campaign, those initial knock and talk efforts were concluded within about 3 days. And at this point, we were fairly certain that that animal, that dog, had not left that house within any previous time before the infestation was found within the dog. And so it kind of brought up the fact that if this was not a travel related case and this was indeed a case that was acquired locally, additional efforts had to be put in to contain any more movement of screwworm out of that area. And so our plan was immediately activated. So upon that confirmation and full knowledge that we were looking at a potentially domestically acquired case, the New Mexico Livestock Board, in consultation with the the United States Department of Agriculture, Veterinary Services, established an infestation zone. And so this infestation zone is approximately a 12.5 mile zone surrounding the case where the screwworm was initially identified. And that consists of movement controls within the infestation zone itself, increased surveillance actions such as trapping for wild flies, mandatory treatment of any animals that are moving outside of the infestation zone, in addition to increased inspection requirements for those animals moving within and exiting the infestation zone. And really, the goal is to stop the spread. We know that whenever we're talking about animal health issues and we're throwing around the terms of movement controls or infestation zone, I know quarantine has been used a lot within the media. We want to make sure that we're messaging, the goal with these types of measures is not to stop the movement of livestock, but to make sure that the movement of livestock and other warm-blooded animals are permitted to move, but safely and without further spreading any more of that New World screwworm. Um, and it's important to remember too that because of this case was detected within a domesticated animal, being on the pet side, the dog. It really brought into question some of the authoritative or jurisdictional actions that the New Mexico Livestock Board or others could take, because at the state level, there is really not an entity that oversees companion animals, such as dogs. But because of the threat that the dog presented to the livestock industry and others at large, we were able to go ahead and implement these containment measures and put them in place. So this is what the actual infestation zone and adjacent surveillance zone looks like on the map surrounding that area. And again, it includes things like movement controls, mandatory treatment of animals within the area that are moving from their home premises. If necessary, there are certain exemptions that are allowed for animals leaving, such as if they're going to slaughter, because of the issues related to some of the medicines and not wanting to have the leftovers of that medicine in the animal as it's going to slaughter. But again, this is about containment, and I want to reemphasize the response was immediate. Once we got that initial notification, we had individuals talking to the owner of the dog that evening. It's heavily resourced in terms of individuals responding to the case. Not only did we have 20 folks on the ground um, doing the boots on the ground activities, but they were supported by about another 20 individuals doing the back end of the response work, anywhere ranging from, ordering resources to doing the paperwork to making sure that we are reporting actions up to USDA, etc. And it's modeled on improving eradication strategies that we've seen used previously, learning from what was done well in the 60s and 70s, but also bringing to bear the new tools that are available. So I mentioned one of the primary tools that was used during the 60s and 70s was that sterilized insect technique. But back then, they also didn't have some of the tools that we currently have in our toolbox at our disposal, such as the new animal drugs, the Dectomax, some of the ivermectins, the porons, etc. And so making sure that we're building all the best in together and learning from what went well the last time we were faced with eradication efforts in the United States, but also learning from what Mexico has been doing and borrowing some of their techniques as well. But I'll just reiterate, and I'm probably going to sound like a broken record moving through this, that the success of these eradication campaigns depend upon rapid detection and reporting. Because if at the end of the day, if it's not known that the New World screwworm is out in the environment and actively breeding and laying more eggs, then we cannot take any kind of control measures to stop the control and push it back out. So talking about some of the animal movement requirements, I think this has been one of the largest questions surrounding folks within the zone, but we've also got a lot of questions from folks outside of the zone in terms of what is required for an animal to move out of the zone. So again, this only applies to animals moving outside of that infested zone. It doesn't apply to anything within the rest of the state. But the requirements for those animals are they have to be visually inspected by an approved inspector within 5 days of movement. And at this time, because it's such a focal outbreak, currently the only approved inspectors are veterinarians and agents of the New Mexico Livestock Board. We are putting in contingency plans to make sure that we have ample resources for additional approved inspectors if we get further outbreaks or regional outbreaks, including some trainings and some online modules that are being developed. But at this time, because it is again an isolated focal outbreak, the only approved inspectors are going to be those New Mexico Livestock Board personnel or veterinarians. Of course, they have to be visible, be free of visible wounds and any type of evidence of New World screwworm infestation, have required official identification per USDA guidance, and receive the appropriate treatment when required. And so, again, if it's not like a slaughter animal that's going to immediate slaughter, or it's a sale barn animal that could be potentially destined for slaughter, there are some exemptions to those. But otherwise, if it's an animal that's moving outside of the zone for other reasons, they're going to have to be treated and certified as having received treatment within an allowable waiting period before exiting the zone. And then if they are exiting the zone and moving interstate, moving to another state, then the receiving state veterinarian also has to approve that movement. That's a similar situation for what normally happens with interstate movement, with veterinarians contacting the receiving state, acknowledging their requirements, and then moving forward with the certificate of veterinary inspection. But a lot of states are now putting on these additional requirements that they be visually inspected, individually visually inspected within those 5 days before movement. And then follow-on actions, once it was identified that this was not a movement-related case, the New Mexico Livestock Board issued an emergency animal health declaration, which essentially formalized the emergency response systems that were already in place and working, but just formalized them in a sense of it's now an emergency response functioning under the New Mexico Livestock Board, allowed for those additional control measures to occur within the infested zones, and authorized other disease and pest control operations, up to and including giving the New Mexico Livestock Board authority to stop movement on companion animals within that infested zone. Now, this all falls under the framework from the USDA Animal and Livestock Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service and what they call their playbook. And so broadly, their playbook is centered on two main strategies, both of which we're implementing here in New Mexico. The first is protecting uninfested animals by preventing contact with New World screwworm flies, the control and containment of the fly within its original infestation zone and not allowing it to breach that infestation zone. And the second is the disruption of the New World screwworm reproduction cycle to prevent establishment. And so that includes the things like the treatments that are available to livestock and pet owners to, one, kill any infestation that is present, and two, in some cases, prevent any future infestation. And then also, as I mentioned, the drop of sterilized the sterilized flies that are produced down in Panama, flown up to Mission Air Force, and then flown over to our site in New Mexico. And up to this point, there has been 2 separate drops for a total of about 2.7 million flies dropped in that area alone. And so I think it's not moving forward. As I mentioned before, there's a heavy demand on those sterilized insect techniques, so we are requesting additional drops. But at this point, with that single infestation and no other cases reported, hoping that 2.7 million drop of flies can get the job done in suppressing the population and allow us to get out from underneath these infestation zones. And so what are our ask of producers? Tom mentioned at the outset in the introduction, this is something that we've seen before, we've dealt with before. Certainly not in my generations, but previous generations know what New World Screwworm is, and they know how to handle it. We know from a scientific measure that the sterilized insect technique works. And again, we also have these additional tools in our toolbox, such as the treatments and the drugs that we can also bring to bear in any type of potential infestations. In addition to that, USDA just yesterday announced the results of their grand challenge for $100 million to a variety of scientifically based research projects to kind of see, what are those other innovative ideas that are out there that just need a little push over the finish line to go from the idea to research to actual implementation on the ground. And so there's a variety of research projects out there ranging from new ways to sterilize the insects to other therapeutics and drugs that can be used. But it's going to take some time for that to flow through. And time is one of those things that we do not have with our current production of the sterilized insect techniques. So again, it all goes back to that reporting and that surveillance and that reporting, and make sure that if you see something that you're reporting it to the New Mexico Livestock Board or the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. And I'll in a little bit I'll switch over to our website and walk through some of how we do that here in a little bit. But at the end of the day, recall that one untreated wound, could that be that potential outbreak source? And early intervention is the key. So in addition to that, we're currently really increasing our trapping efforts within, right now, the area of Lee County and Eunice. But we're acknowledging that trapping as a method of monitoring, we simply do not have enough traps out on the landscape to give us a good idea of that we know for certain we don't have screwworm flies flying elsewhere in the landscape. So we're increasing our trapping efforts in southeastern New Mexico. Eventually, we will be increasing our trapping efforts throughout the rest of the state, depending on the spread of the screwworm and where it's advisable from the entomologist to do so. And that includes working with landowners and obtaining the correct permissions to put fly traps out on their ranch. We are also encouraging producers to think about what upcoming management activities that they've got. Whether it's we're not quite finished branding yet, or maybe we need to bring in a herd of stockers and get them moved off to a different pasture. But consider those management activities that you've got upcoming. Potentially what management activities you may be able to delay to avoid increasing any kind of wounds, or if need be, go ahead and doing those management activities in conjunction with other risk mitigation activities, such as administering the proper drugs. But with that being said, there's no need just to go out and administer drugs if you're not already doing some kind of other management activities, unless you're within the area of an active infested zone or the adjacent surveillance zone. One of the concerns from the veterinary community is overuse of some of the new tools that we have and creating some resistance and building up resistance of our current active drugs within the New World screwworm populations. So then I'll go ahead and get out of the PowerPoint and transition over to our website. And this is where we're really trying to push a lot of our updated information, such as the confirmed cases, the zone maps, what producers can do, the resources for that. And so I'll start here with our zone map. And what this tool is one of the tools that's specific to New Mexico and New Mexico residents. And as it gets loaded up, our hope is that we don't have to add to this map anymore. But if we do, it's a good tool to allow folks to see where they fall at in relation to the current established infested zones and surveillance zones. So I'm hoping that we're updating and you all can now see the orange and blue circle.
Yes.
Perfect. So as mentioned earlier, these are the two zones. The infested zone, of course, is that 12.5 mile circle. And then outside of that is another 12.5 miles to draw the adjacent zone. And so what folks can do is if they want to, they can type in their address up here to figure out if they're within or outside of these two zones, or they can simply click on the map and it will load up whether or not they are in the zone. So if I click in just the adjacent surveillance zone, it'll tell us where it is located relative to that zone, and it also includes some information relative to steps that producers can take. And then if I back out of there and then go into the infested zone, it'll tell them what the requirements are for moving anything out of the infested zone. And of course, just encouraging again that individuals report as soon as possible if they see something that is out of the ordinary. So that'll give you an idea of where you're at relative to the zones. And then if we get back into our website, there are some other useful tools that we've got loaded up here, including methods to identify some of the flies and the larvae that have been developed by the entomologists. Links back to any type of USDA resources because they also do have a one-stop shop up at the USDA level that folks can go to. But one of the things I really want to drill down to for this group is the reporting. So as mentioned earlier, reporting is the single most important thing to allowing New Mexico to first identify and then respond to any future incursions. And so to aid those efforts, we have put together about 2,000 New World Screwworm sample kits and distributed them statewide. And so folks often ask, where can I get my hands on one of these? And we have sampling kits located at every single cooperative extension office throughout the state. In addition to others, such as the New Mexico Livestock Board, our game wardens through the Department of Wildlife have been issued sampling kits, etc. And so if folks are interested in getting their hands on one of those, they can ask one of those three entities. But also, even without a sampling kit at hand, we still encourage folks to submit samples through the New Mexico Livestock Board and our state entomologist so that she can identify the type of submission that's coming through and say, yes, this is New World Screwworm, or no, it's not. And then allow that message to be relayed either up further to USDA or back to the person who submitted the original sample. And so we just always like to remind people, you don't necessarily need one of those kits to submit a sample. You can get any sealable container, put the larvae in the sample, seal it up with 70% alcohol in the container, and then there are further instructions on the website itself of where to send it to. But we do want to encourage people, if you are taking a sample, make sure that you leave no larvae behind. So if one of those larvae has the opportunity to drop off and pupate in the ground, again, that's another method for an established breeding population to get started. So one of the slogans is throughout this, our response efforts are: one, be alert, not alarmed. It's here now. We know it's here, but we don't need to be alarmed at any further movement, but certainly be alert of what's going on within your community and within your operations. And the second is leave no larvae behind. If you do identify larvae, ensure to kill it with 70% alcohol, any type of the permethrin sprays, etc., to make sure that those larvae are not allowed to continue on in a breeding population. So with that, that will conclude my presentation proper, but I'd be happy to answer any questions or entertain any suggestions that the group has.
So we're known as Navajo Sustainable Agriculture Project, but in short, we're called the NSA Project. So for those of you who, our program is funded by the USDA Outreach and Assistance for Native Farmers and Ranchers and Veteran Farmers and Ranchers Program. So at NSAP, our goal is to support producers by providing resources that strengthen their operations, improve profitability, and promote sustainability. So we do offer both in-person workshop and webinars based on the producers' feedback that we gather from each of our sessions, from webinars to in-person sessions. Some of you that have, attended both, you understand the evaluations that we use is somewhat of a roadmap for us to understand what type of resources that you guys are wanting from us to provide. So some of the recent, topics that we provided were livestock record keeping, which is a big deal to every operations, livestock first aid training. I know that's a big one that we provided 3 years ago, and it's been continuing on. So we're happy to see the outcome that a lot of folks use that first aid kit to its potential. We do have a lot of the horticulture involvement. So not only do we do all of these by ourselves, but we do have project partners that are listed below with their logos on that make these type of education assistance happen. So a lot of our horticulturalists are those that, we ourselves, myself in particular, is I'm not a green thumb whatsoever. So I would definitely need the assistance and the support coming from our project partners like COPE for standing for community outreach and patient empowerment out from Gallup. And we do have Diné College land grant, and as well as our good specialists coming out from the main campus in Las Cruces. So they're really a big help when it comes to those horticulture garden needs. Another important focus of ours, of our program that really highlights us as a whole is our conservation planning program. So our staff work directly with producers throughout the Eastern and Northern Navajo agencies. For those of you that are not aware of where those two areas are, so Eastern Agency is more in the New Mexico area, the Crown Point, Gallup, and all those areas. And we also have for Northern is like Shiprock, Farmington, and such in those areas as well. But those are just, there's more chapters that are covered within those two agencies that I'm not, obviously covering as I speak. But if you want to know more about how we provide this conservation planning assistance, definitely reach out to our specialist, Ms. Shirley Toth, who helps us run this conservation planning program. Lastly, we do continue working and increasing our food production in McKinley, San Juan, and Cibola counties through our garden projects in partnership with COPE, LGO, and the NMSU CES. So we appreciate you guys joining us, and we look forward to continuing to provide this type of outreach for you guys. And please share your feedback at the end of this webinar and share with us, what you feel about tonight's session, how you feel, what ways we can improve, and what you wish to see more of. So with that, let's go ahead and begin our introductions with our guest speakers.